Good morning or good afternoon to everybody. Today, we are joining you to chat a little bit about how media and publishing brands are driving growth through subscriptions. So today, you have myself, Emma Clark. I'm head of strategic initiatives at Recurly. So Recurly is a subscription billing and management platform. We help over 2,000 businesses across the world. Many of them are all of them are subscription based, and many of them are digital media and publishing companies. So we're really excited to talk a little bit about the trends that we're seeing, best practices, and then we're lucky enough today to have Mike with us as well from Digiday. Mike, do you want to give us a little bit of an introduction and tell us a little bit about Digiday?
Sure. Thanks, Emma. So I'm Mike Madaris. I head up marketing and growth at Digiday. And for those of you not familiar, Digiday is one of Digiday Media's three brands. So Digiday Media is a vertical B2B media company. So one of the things that I think is really cool about Digiday is that we're really diversified in the way that we make money. We have a really big events business that Emma and I were just talking about a little bit. We have global awards programs. We have a huge custom content business. And obviously subscriptions is a big part of that also. So I sort of have a unique perspective because I do get to work on so many different lines of business, and specifically subscriptions. We at Digiday, we have Digiday, which focuses on media and marketing. We have Glossy, which focuses on fashion and beauty. And we have Modern Retail, which focuses on retail. So I sort of get to see subscriptions and how they work across a few different audiences, which I think is kind of unique.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome. We'll talk a little bit more in a bit about Digiday as a subscription business in particular. Before we do that, just want to talk a little bit through the agenda today. So, we'll chat for about, call it 45-ish minutes. And first, we're going to dig into a little bit of the industry benchmark data that Recurly has around growth in the subscription economy as it relates to digital media publishers. And then Mike and I are going to chat a little bit about some of the industry trends that we're seeing that we think might be interesting to you. And then lastly, would love to hear from Mike. Like he said, he's from, across three different brands. We can talk a little bit about Digiday subscription strategies. I think they'll definitely be relevant to a lot of you here. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and dig into the research. What I wanted to do today was walk you through kind of something we call Recurly research. And this is publicly available information that we have where, because we serve subscription businesses across a number of different verticals across the world, and in particular, a lot of the call it larger digital publishers, we're able to actually take that data, anonymize it, normalize it, and then give you a little bit of insight into what we're seeing in the subscription economy itself. So just a little background on that, because just to help you understand what we were looking at in this particular study was around what we're seeing right now during the time of COVID-19 and quarantine. So what we did was we looked at a study period between March 16th and June 29th, 2020. So a few month period. And we wanted to look at the growth rate in subscriptions relative to the weeks prior to most of the quarantine shutdown, especially in the United States, as well as Western Europe, which is around, call it early to mid-March. And so we kind of took those early weeks in 2020 as our kind of normal, call it our normal period. And then we said, okay, what's going on during COVID-19 and quarantine relative to that in terms of subscription trials, in terms of conversion from free trial or paywall to paid subscription, as well as total number of growth in subscriptions overall. And I think the trends are really interesting and kind of surprising, to be honest. So just have a little bit of information on the data set so that you understand. I won't go through all of that, but it'll give you an idea of the types of businesses we're including. We want to make sure that this data is clean and it makes sense to you. So we're only including subscription publishers that are large enough to be included in the study and have a substantial amount of data to analyze. So here you can see what we're looking at is specifically in the digital media and publishing space. These are all subscriptions in that space. We wanted to look at the number of new trial signups, right? So that could be a free trial, meaning you may create an account and have access to content on the other side of the paywall. And then in order to actually, convert and sign up as a subscriber, you have to pay. That's generally what we've seen. And what you can see here in the trends is from the very beginning, we saw a fairly large jump in the total number of new trial signups. So many of the largest news outlets that we work with either extended trials often, or they're playing around with what was included pre and post paywall in order to give access to, in particular, sometimes healthcare, government, and market news, but also just as it relates to the specific, I would say, content niche that they're in. And then again, when we talk about that jump of the 57 almost percent on the week of 316, that's relative even to the week right before it, which is pretty massive. And then the largest growth was mostly through March and April, with anywhere between 45 and 60% jump in new trials relative to a pre-COVID period. And then we started to see the growth in new trial signups kind of start to slow down a bit as things normalized as we moved into June. So I think, across all subscription industries that we were looking at, there was pretty healthy growth all through April. We saw a massive increase as well within the digital media and publishing space and kind of e-learning content. That was a really big spike as everyone went into quarantine and we're trying to kind of identify ways to keep their kids entertained. And then, the next thing I wanted to talk about just briefly is what did this mean in terms of conversions? So I think as we go into understanding anything from a new trial sign up and moving into a conversion, we actually saw that conversion spiked as well after the COVID period began. So that's jumping from 42% to 53% the last few weeks of March. So by that, meaning we actually not only saw, hey, people are actually trying out new services and new content, but they're converting to paying for that, which is really encouraging. And then from there, outside, we saw a slight dip in April, just to 38%. The conversion rate remained above 49% for the remainder of the study period. So it's actually a pretty decent conversion rate, I'd say, relative to what we see. And we have a little bit more information on our Recurly Research site around, the type of conversion rates, what we're seeing as a, normal or median conversion rate, even pre-COVID as well. And so that'll give you an idea of kind of where you compare. So I think the key message here is we are seeing that subscription businesses offering trials were successful in converting those trials. And the last thing I wanted to look at was just, what does that mean in terms of total paid subscription growth? So I think this one's really interesting is like I said earlier, we saw this spike in total new trials from the very beginning of quarantine. But then what you see is all of those starting to convert into paid subscriptions. So this almost 200% increase relative to a pre-COVID period in mid-April. And that's actually the largest jump of new subscribers we saw across any industry, which is pretty fascinating. So many of the new trials between March and early April, they did convert, like I said, to paid subscribers. This growth has slowed down, back to normal patterns in June. And so the last thing I'd say here before kind of turning over to Mike is, what this indicates to me is you see that 622 is only 1% higher than pre-COVID periods. It's kind of going back to normal. So the question for these businesses are, how do you actually retain the subscribers that we have seen this kind of uptick in new acquisition? How do you make sure that you're retaining those subscribers through the rest of the year? So addressing things like paywall fatigue, right? Having the right mix of premium content to incentivize loyalty, to continue to provide value to those subscribers. We've talked to a lot of businesses about offering the ability to pause, perhaps, right? So people are usually have different circumstances where maybe they were thinking about canceling their subscription, but when you offer the ability to pause instead and kind of reactivate a later time, that can actually save the customer and the customer experience. As well as hardening their strategies around churn and involuntary churn and payment churn in particular, which is something that Recurly works on a lot. And then the last thing I'd say here before I hand it over to Mike is we've also been talking to a lot of businesses that are seeing this trend around not only how do you turn those newly acquired customers into valuable lifetime customers and prevent churn, but also how do you grow average revenue per subscriber and offer upsells and bundles? So I think it's really interesting. We're seeing more bundling across the industry. For example, Bloomberg is just testing out, right, bundling with Athletic. I know they had tried that with The Information, which is a high-end business and tech publication before. Now they're actually trying that out with The Athletic to say, hey, are our customers who are interested in Bloomberg also interested in this type of content? And can we increase our average revenue per customer that way? So, I think the interesting thing here that we're really seeing for some of these customers is, not only how can you retain them and grow lifetime value, but also, where can you find paths to grow average revenue per subscriber? And so what we've seen are things like these bundles, for example. So Bloomberg testing out, including The Athletic is one great way of an example of how an industry leader in digital media subscriptions is testing out bundling. They also tested that out with The Information, which is a high-end business and tech publication. I'm not sure, if they're just trying to identify, hey, here's our core subscriber. How else can we actually reach them and bundle another publication together and win together in order to retain that customer and provide more value? But we've also seen other publishers offering gifting, especially as we move into the holiday season. I think this is going to be really important, which is how do you take your existing subscribers or those that are, even have awareness of your subscription product and offer the option to gift that to other people. And that offers another path to acquisition that actually is lower cost to the publisher, given that it's fairly word of mouth. You're not actually usually having to do, have direct acquisition costs associated with advertising. And so it's a great way to leverage your existing loyal base that might be a subscriber who wants to gift that to somebody else. So those are just a few of kind of the trends, the best practices that we're talking to digital publishers about. Mike, if you don't mind, I'd love to hear from your perspective, from Digiday's perspective, what else you're seeing in the industry right now as well.
Sure. Well, I think, we've actually covered it quite a bit ourselves. Basically, what you've been alluding to in the last few graphs, we've been referring to it as the Corona bump. So that started, way back in March. We started seeing big spikes in memberships, and about the middle of March, it carried into April, started to flatten out a little bit into May and the later spring. So basically, from all the publishers we've been reporting on, we've seen pretty much the same trend. At Digiday Media ourselves, we've seen pretty much the same trend. Ours is not as pronounced as the some of the graphs that you alluded to. Probably, well, it is due to the fact that we sort of tread pretty lightly when it comes to trials. But anyway, so using January and February from this year as a benchmark for us, we saw subscriptions sort of creep up about 7% in March, 16% in April, and then flatten out a little bit to like 14% in May. But very much the same pattern as, the ones that we saw in your graphs. And I think you kind of hit the nail on the head in terms of lifetime value and being able to hold on to these subscribers afterwards. At Digiday, we are sort of always inherently skeptical about like a lot of these sort of tactics that subscriptions are trying. Some of them, that publishers are trying with subscriptions. Some of them tend to border on, I don't want to say gimmicky, but maybe a little bit. So anyway,
no, I think that's fair, right? I mean, it all comes back to the economics of the subscription model, right? Like you can try some of these things to encourage new acquisitions, but the reality is if you can't retain and grow that subscriber base, you're going to turn them out and it doesn't economically make sense, right? It's all about what's the payback ratio, how much are you spending on that customer relative to convert them, right? On that potential customer relative to how you retain them and grow that revenue. There's a payback ratio. And if you're not reaching that, then to your point, kind of all of the, I would say, things that some may try to get in new acquisitions are never going to produce a viable subscription or never going to produce viable subscription growth if they can't actually retain those customers through the value they're providing long-term, right? So, I mean, I understand what you're saying completely.
Yeah, 100%. And even if you're not necessarily paying to acquire one of those subscribers for $1 for a week or $5 for a month or whatever it is, there is definitely an opportunity cost built into acquiring every one of those subscribers at a low price because you're going to cannibalize some of the revenue that you would have brought in anyway.
Sure.
So really you need to think about all these subscribers in terms of lifetime value. So I kind of mentioned that at Digiday Media, we tend to tread a little bit lightly when it comes to sort of like these trial offers. We see our subscription offering as a very premium offering, and we always want to price it that way and treat it that way. So we sort of tiptoe around a lot of these different trial offers and things like that. But we have been experimenting with it a little bit lately, and we've actually been pretty encouraged by it. Generally, our renewal rate is about 70% on subscriptions, and it's a pretty small data set, but early on, we've seen a renewal rate of about 50% on what's basically a special offer of $10, a $10 trial for 1 month. So I think that's been pretty encouraging for us so far.
Interesting. Okay. How long
Yeah,
have you guys run that? Have you run that for a few months, or what was kind of the impetus to thinking through that?
yeah. So we've kind of avoided it like the plague over the last couple of years.
Yeah.
I think like every business is different, every subscription is different, and ours we have a very narrow addressable audience because we're niche B2B media. So the addressable audiences for everything that we cover are very narrow. We have a premium offering. So because there's I want to say such a little bit of a limited audience that we can sell to, we need to really make sure that we're wringing every dollar we can out of every
Yeah.
subscription. So that's one of the reasons that we kind of have been playing those sort of tactics like really close to the vest. But I think we started to realize that it was almost a necessary evil in terms of like a growth tactic. So going back a couple months when we really first introduced it, and like I said, we've been kind of pleasantly surprised with some of the results so far. I think really the interesting part is where some of these subscribers are coming from and the behaviors they're showing in terms of sticking around. So we're seeing the people that are coming in through this offer on the subscribe page are sticking around 87% of the time.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so that's great. And the people that are coming in through the metered paywall are sticking around 50% of the time, and the people that are coming in through some of our locked content that just permanently lives behind the paywall are sticking around 33% of the time. So I think it kind of goes to show you that a lot of times people use those offers as just a way of circumventing your paywall one time, and they're not always the highest lifetime value subscribers.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think, like I said,
I mean, that can happen. That can absolutely happen. But I think to your point, it also depends on the business model. Like you guys are, I think sometimes too, you're highlighting, or we could think about the differences between a B2C and a B2B publisher, right? So tell me a little bit about, if you don't mind taking a step back, tell me a little bit about, did Digiday always have a subscription model, right? And who's the target customer? How has that business model evolved over time? Maybe that can help give us, I think a basis for people to understand a little bit about why it might be different and, how you might think about that subscription offering different than someone like the New York Times, the New Yorker, or Allure, for example, right?
Sure. So to answer the first part of your question, the short answer is no. Digiday did not always have a subscription.
Yeah.
So a lot of people don't know this, but Digiday actually started out as an event back in 2008. And because of that, events have always been like really critical and really core to our DNA and everything that we do as a company. But I think if you ask Nick Friese, our founder and CEO, he would say that his vision was always to build out a diversified vertical media company, which is what we've done on top of, that first event way back in 2008. So we sort of tacked on the other lines of business along the way. So awards was one early on. Custom content has been a big business for us. Advertising has sort of always been there, and subs was really kind of the last piece of the puzzle for this diversified media business that we had always been striving for. So I think especially now people might look at that like now at a time when subscriptions are viewed as critical and really attractive line of business. People might look at that and say, oh, Digiday was sort of late to the game on subscriptions. And to that I would kind of say yes and no. So I'm sure that if we had started our subscription business, 2 or 3 years earlier, it would definitely be bigger than it is right now. But I think focusing on all those other things along the way, like, building our audience and building our brand and building out these other really profitable lines of business sort of got us to the point that we needed to be in order to build a really successful subscriptions business under all those other things that were already in place.
Yeah.
So we launched our other two brands, Glossy and Modern Retail, really off the backs of Digiday. And had we sort of moved to subscriptions a little bit earlier, and maybe as a result of that, you could argue that it may have hurt like some audience development efforts. Would we have been able to successfully launch those brands? I'm not sure.
I was going to say, I think that's interesting too, to think about it in terms of, not only was I was thinking, okay, B2B, B2C, but also, how did the subscription offering come about for you guys is different too, because you were fairly diversified as a media company from the get-go. It wasn't purely just digital content, right? Which also makes sense why subscriptions might have come in at a different time, and also are viewed, in my understanding, as a fairly premium part of your entire offering, right? And so it plays a single role in terms of revenue, but it's not, it's not just a path, like a single upgrade path to say, okay, consumption of content pre-paywall, consumption of content post-paywall on a subscription, right? It's more complicated than that, which I think adds some different elements, different elements that are not always the case with every publisher, especially those that I think sometimes are selling directly to customers versus offering a more, call it, diversified, robust offering to businesses in particular.
Like I mentioned, we sort of had these other lines of business built up at first, and then subscriptions has been a little bit more recent. And I think if you look at like some of the strategy and some of the tactics, I guess you would call them, over the last couple of years, it really reflects more of our shifting to subscriptions and focusing a lot more on subscriptions. Things like putting up a meter on Digiday last year. I mean, that certainly wasn't good for a display advertising business or some of these other lines of business, but it really helped our subscriptions business. If you take something like our Future of TV briefing, which Tim Peterson does a great job on it, he covers video and TV for us. We had built that up to over 5 figures of subscribers over the course of a year or two. And that was something we could have kept building out. We could have used it as audience development for all these events and awards and sold it to sponsors, but we decided to make it a subscriber only feature. So again, kind of like sort of maybe choking off like an audience development thing in favor of subscriptions. So I think those are just like a couple of the examples of, I guess, like some of the maneuvers that we've made. But to your point, sort of like the balancing act that you have to play when you do have all these different mouths to feed with all these different lines of business.
Yeah, well, but I think even, we see that with a lot of the big publishers that are moving from multiple revenue streams to decide whatever is part of the offering. Are to your point, are you going to try to focus more on audience development, and that might be a free offering, and what does that mean in terms of the potential revenue as it relates to ads or other revenue streams relative to what you think you're going to get out of offering it as a premium part of your subscription, right? And often that's why we're seeing a lot of people testing that, right? So especially right now, we've been talking to a lot of publishers that are testing kind of what's available to all customers, and then switching that around and kind of putting it behind the paywall and saying, okay, is this premium enough for us to provide as part of the subscription, and what are we seeing the revenue generated? Is that going to convert more people over relative to the ad revenue if it was offered for free? And I don't think anybody knows that from the get-go, right? No, I mean, it's not possible. And so I think approaching pricing and packaging, and we talk about this a lot, as an iterative process as it relates to publishers, I think that's part of it too. If you look at a subscription page on most digital publishers' website relative to other industries, you might say, well, like the offerings are not super complex, right? You have access to content or you don't. But I think behind the scenes, people don't always see how complex it is in terms of testing around with what you offer and what you think that's going to generate through which revenue stream. So is there anything you guys, how did your team pivot your subscription strategy, if anything, during COVID-19? I mean, I know that it's not always related to necessarily pricing, but to testing pricing, but has there been any change that you've seen there that you've had to make, or has it just been a pretty steady uptick overall?
Yeah, I think more the latter probably, as opposed to like there's really fundamental way or like really fundamental change to the way we approach subscriptions. And we sort of alluded to it at the start, where there was just the Corona bump showed this just general increase in demand for subscriptions and for news content back in the spring. So I think that actually, this might sound kind of weird, but I think that actually played into our favor across all of our brands, because our thing has always been that we're going to chart the changes that are underpinning and changing all these different industries: media marketing with Digiday, retail with Modern Retail, and fashion and beauty with Glossy. And there's perhaps never been a time of more accelerated change or more dramatic change than right now. So all of a sudden our coverage was just like extremely well positioned to be able to capture all this demand that was now being built up back in March and April. So I think like that in and of itself, just the way that we had always covered the industry and positioned ourselves, put us in a really good spot to be able to sort of cash in on some of the demand that came out of March and April. But sort of behind the scenes, there were definitely things that we did change out, more like internal organization things than anything else. I guess one piece of that would be the resources that we were able to sort of divert away So the resources that would have in the past been pointed towards events and awards and probably some other like bigger client campaigns that we were working on, like all of a sudden we're not working on those things anymore. So we can kind of point them in another direction, and that direction was at subscriptions. So a lot of that was manpower, but then also just marketing inventory too. I mean, if we have less events to promote, there's less emails we need to send for those events. There's less display ads we need to show for those events. We can dedicate all that stuff to subscriptions. So I think that played into some of the success we saw in back in March and April also. So the best way I could quantify that for you is we sort of, and I think probably a lot of publishers do the same thing. We sort of look at email as like a very finite resource for us because you can only, well, theoretically, you can only put so many emails in a person's inbox at one time.
You should only put so many emails in a person's inbox. Yeah.
That's what the best practice says. Yeah. So that's something we try to be like as I guess judicious as we can. In March, we saw 117% increase in the number of email inventory, or the amount of email inventory that we are devoting to subs. And then in April, we saw a 60% increase in it. So anyway, that's just my one stab at trying to sort of quantify the resources that we put towards it.
Is that devoted to specific your subscribers or around subscription content overall, right? Because I know you guys have two sides of the house. One, you're reporting on these different industry lines and what's going on in subscriptions. You know, I'm reading articles all the time on Digiday around how you know, what are publishers having to do to I would say, you know, keep up and understand that move to digital subscriptions. What are we seeing in the industry? Same with modern retail on the retail side. Like that's a huge, like that's, you know, direct to customer and subscriptions and retail in particular are two hot topics, something you guys report on a lot. So are you speaking to the type of content or your subscribers and what you send out about your subscription offerings themselves?
So that's us promoting our subscription.
Okay, program. Got it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
No, that makes sense. I have seen, it's interesting though, because I have seen on Digiday's site as well, you know, how COVID, you know, not only have you guys seen the COVID bump, but reporting on how other publishers have seen that as well, especially the publicly traded ones that are, or anyone who are publishing their statistics around new subscriber signups. Like I know the Tribune saw a really big spike over the last little bit. There's just been this flurry of companies that are offering subscriptions, whether that's been TechCrunch, Blueberg, Fortune. They're all kind of putting up paywalls, and I'm, you know, that's where I think any of these trends that we're starting to see in this industry are almost, it's not that they've changed a ton, they're just becoming accelerated, right? So everyone, I think to your point, I think my guess or my hypothesis is, and from customers that we've talked to, a lot of the things that you're saying, okay, we're diverting resources away from X and we're focusing on subscriptions, that's happening all over the place. And by the fact that that is happening, anything you wanted to test, wanted to think about, putting the resources, the money behind developing your subscription model and the interactions with your subscribers and how you think about where subscription revenue plays a part of your entire growth strategy, I think that's happening across the board. And it's because everyone's having to rethink that interaction with their customers, regardless of whether or not that customer is a business and you have events, or that customer is someone who is used to getting their newspaper on their doorstep every day, right? And I think that dynamic has changed, and we're seeing that across all these industries, just this acceleration of the same and similar trends that we saw before, really mainly for any digital-based business, right? Things, of course, are changing kind of the in-person or events atmosphere. So it's really interesting to hear how you guys were thinking about taking those resources and like, how do we then kind of divert that to focus on a different revenue stream, in particular subscriptions? So Mike, a little while ago, you mentioned that you guys tried out this special 1 month, $10 kind of trial offer. I would love to hear a little bit more from you about kind of how did you guys approach that? What were you expecting out of it? Kind of how is that different? Walk us through, you know, what is the kind of pre-subscriber experience like right now on Digiday? Just if you're consuming regular content, what is the kind of, what are the options as a Digiday Plus member, and why you thought about offering this alternative? What role it played, and what you guys, you know, what you guys think what's gonna happen within the future.
I'll kind of start from the beginning and walk you through the whole experiment.
Yeah.
So like I said, we've always really tiptoed around the whole special offer thing because there's a lot of considerations. We want to maintain our premium pricing. We don't want to cheapen the product at all. So for that reason, we've always been a little shy about it. I think, you know, we've optimized on Digiday especially, we've optimized in a lot of other places, and we were sort of like running out of things to optimize like on the list, and we got to like special offers as a tactic. And at the same time, we're seeing a lot of other publishers have a lot of success with it. Bloomberg is the one that comes to mind. I know they spend a lot of money on paid acquisition and different like $1 offers and stuff like that. We're okay with the fact that this was a little bit of maybe a necessary evil and something that we had to do. So thinking in terms of like the actual strategy of it. So right now, if you go to Digiday and you try to become a Digiday Plus member, you can become a member for 3 months for $159, for a year for $395, or for 2 years for $649. So those are our three options. So when we were sort of considering a price point for this, obviously the main consideration is we don't want to cheapen the product at all. And so I don't know if there's really a formula out there to really nail down like how we cheapen something by doing this, but we landed on $10 for 1 month. It sort of felt like a nice middle ground for us. What we did was run an A/B test for 60 days. Randomly, half the people that landed on either the subscribe page or hit one of our gates would get the $10 offer, and half would get in place of that $10 offer, the 3 month for $159 offer would still be there. And one of the other big considerations that we really had to sort of take into account was that, like I mentioned earlier, we weren't necessarily, paying a bill from Facebook for, X number of advertising dollars, but there's definitely some cannibalization that goes on there. And at a time when some of our other lines of business aren't performing the same as they were last year, it's something that you definitely have to consider. So that was sort of the risk we knew going into it. This is probably not surprising to anyone, but we did get a lot more subscribers on the version of that AP test that was presenting the $10 offer. We also saw sort of the cannibalization that we did expect, but the whole time we've been coming at this from an LTV perspective. So when looking at that, right now we're seeing 50% retention on these on the subscribers that are coming in, which I think we're on the pleasantly surprised side with. Our normal retention rate is around 70%. Might change a little bit depending on the week, but it's right around there. So I think, early indications are we're pretty happy with it. Like I said, we're most concerned with LTV. So that's what we're going to, keep our eye on, certainly for the first month that people are on this offer. And then, every time they go to renew after that, our average LTV is around $700, between $700 and $800. So really, we need these people to turn over about 4 or 5 times to make it worth it. So I guess it's really,
and that takes time, right? To actually, so it's lifetime value and measuring it, and any test experiment you do, it's going to take time to see, when do those customers reach kind of what you would expect in terms of your average, or bypass it, or what's that ratio, right, look like? It's not like 1 month in, you're like, great, we're good, right? So it takes a little bit of time. And I'm assuming you guys kind of set that up to be able to measure on a cohorted basis. How do you guys, are you measuring, hey, here's what a normal 3-month subscriber would look like relative to this special offer? And over time, you'll take a look and say, do we want to continue doing that? Is that kind of the approach?
I think more or less. It's all about, all right, I'll throw another buzzword at you. It's all about the incrementality of it. So did we get more lifetime value out of those subscribers that came in through the $10 offer? We went through the exercise of doing this. We started getting some of the results back in terms of renewals, and they were like, all right, here's our recommendation. We think you should roll this out. And we were kind of like, wait a second. Our North Star here is LTV, and we have like very limited information on that. So I don't know. I think that's like I guess I'll call it one of the annoying parts about like some of these experiments is you want to know sort of like instantaneously if things are working. Yeah. Really, it requires a lot of patience to truly know if you're optimizing towards the right thing. So,
well, it's funny you say that, because the reality is that's the beautiful part, and I would say the hard part about the subscription model, which is it's not you're no longer looking at just purely conversion metrics, or you're no longer looking at views. You're looking at that's the whole point of the concept, that you have to drive loyalty in your customer base. That's why these experiments are never simple. So yeah, I mean, I'm with you. I think it's, in some ways, it's what we love about the subscription model, that every single month or year, whenever they renew, like there's this expectation of, you said you knew what your general retention rate is. Well, from a financial perspective, you're actually able to then say, okay, if we believe retention is X, every month you're not starting from guesswork on viewership. You actually know what that installed base of revenue is driving. But at the same time, because it's month over month or year over year, any of these experiments take a long time. And so it's certainly hard to kind of, I would say, that balance between, how do you test something and actually make sure that's not eating too much into any sort of, opportunity cost of doing something else. Well, that can take months at a time. So you guys are smart to think about, like, yes, we have to make sure that we're looking at LTV as the North Star. It just will take a little longer for you to get to that kind of normalized metric. Yeah, we hear that a lot. Yeah. Well, cool. I think just one more question I'd love to hear, because we were talking about data a little bit, which is, is there any other data that you'd mentioned that you look at to inform gaps and opportunities, especially as it relates to the Digiday Plus, kind of membership model? What do you guys track, right? How do you think about, is it new signups and lifetime value? Do you think about that in terms of different types of audiences? Just walk me through that a little bit.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I don't mean to oversimplify this, but I think we have like a really straightforward answer to this. And that's, we look at the different things that are converting people, and we look at the different things that people who are already members are engaging with. So just to sort of walk it back a little bit, Digiday Media is obviously, we're a bootstrapped media company. We're about 80 people right now. So we do not have the luxury of having a data science team like the Wall Street Journal might have, or a member or a subscriber engagement team like some of these other big publishers might have. So we have to keep it a little bit more simple than some of those guys might. So we really think about subscriptions in terms of the two obvious things: acquiring new customers and keeping the ones that we have. So from that standpoint, like I said, we're really just focused the most on what's converting people and what people who are already converted are engaging with. So just to give you an idea of like what that might look like in practice, I think our Plus Talks and really all of our virtual events are a good example of that. So we keep, really, really detailed engagement data on all these different virtual events that we do. One of them of which is Digiday Plus Talks, which are an event series available only to Digiday Plus members. So we keep all kinds of data in terms of how many people are tuning in for each episode, how many people are watching the recording, how many people are consuming the email recaps, how many people are reading sort of our analysis of each talk. So I think from that we can see which episodes and which topics and which guests are really driving the most engagement. And we can see a little bit on the conversion side also. It always gets a little bit sticky with attribution in terms of last touch and things like that. So yeah, those are some of the things that we look at to, I guess I would say from that standpoint, we look at it to inform other Digiday Plus talks, but obviously it can also apply to other things that we're covering and other like formats for content also. So I think that's from like a subscriptions standpoint specifically, but I would also probably look at it from a Digiday Media perspective. I think I may have alluded to this a little bit before, but we kind of rolled out glossy and modern retail from Digiday audiences. And really what we did was sort of like incubate those audiences to start off. And we saw that, all right, there is a demand for, the type of coverage that Digiday is doing in the retail industry. And there is demand for this type of coverage in the fashion and beauty industry. And we were able to create pop-up newsletters and events that lived within Digiday, but they were really sort of like testing beds in a way for these other brands. And then ultimately we just sort of, lopped those off, put them over here as a different brand. And all of a sudden we're building up, another subscription business underneath it. So it's a little more, I guess, of a roundabout way of thinking about like some of the gaps and opportunities in subscriptions. But that's been something that we've had a lot of success with over the last couple of years.
Yeah, no, but that makes sense. I think because what you're really talking about is, what testing, using your existing customer base, testing what you think, they'll find value out of. And then when you find that sweet spot, whether that for you guys in particular, that's been, whether that's been modern retail or glossy, you've identified that. And then you figure out, okay, well, is that a different revenue stream? Is that just like part of the same? I think, as it comes, we always talk about the subscription model, just like really identifying the core value that your customer base gets out of your product or service, and then working upon that. And it might not be, hey, a new product line or a new service line or a new brand, but often it can turn out to be that way, right? But where you started from was the same basic concept, which is like, let's test. We think that they'll find value in X. Let's test it. And that's how I think any sort of subscription business, whether it's in the digital media space and kind of multimedia like you guys are, or whether it's a physical goods subscription like a FabFitFun who says, okay, great, our customers love beauty and wellness and fitness, and we were providing a box, but now we're actually going to reach out and start to provide streaming media. Now we're actually going to provide news. Now we're actually going to provide, digital online forums for people to meet each other, right? So it's identifying, this is what our core base, this is what they care about. How can we serve that? And how can we expand that? So, for you guys, it sounds like that's really based upon testing the type of content that you provide. And then you figure out what does the revenue model look like for that. That's cool. Awesome. I think that's it, Mike. I really enjoyed chatting with you today. Thank you for giving us an idea of kind of under the hood about how Digiday thinks about their subscription membership model, and chatting a little bit about kind of what we're seeing right now and especially in the world that we're living in today as it relates to, I'd call it these growing trends towards digital subscriptions for any digital media or publishing company out there. And I think we're just going to continue to see more of that and kind of these accelerated trends. So I'm excited to hear how Digiday reports on it. I'll continue to keep an eye out. And thanks again for joining us.
All right. Well, thank you so much for having me. And if anyone has any questions, I'm just Mike@digiday.com. So feel free to reach out.